Kanye spoke to me about doing a website, probably when we were doing Black Skinhead. Then, I guess probably 3 years ago, we started talking about it more regularly. One of his favorite films is the Japanese manga cartoon Akira. And I reworked part of that proposal for him. And he loved that. And that sort of got him hooked into the idea of making the website. So we started there. At the time, Kanye was a different man, and his artistic output looked very different. The first aesthetics 3 years ago were a lot tougher, a lot more brutal, and a lot more lo-fi. Kanye likes lo-fi because it's more direct. It has less room for artistic interpretation, if you want. It's very functional. I think it's that directness that he likes as an aesthetic. When we first started researching for this, we looked at the most functional sites you can buy from on the internet. So things like sites that sell you hospital equipment or sites that sell you stuff to go camping or fishing in. So very kind of a low artistic aesthetic, but very high performance, if you want to try and look at the non-artistic approach to making a website. Kanye got fixated on one particular picture from a medical supply website, which was 3 surgical gowns, and they were on a blue background. And Kanye also previously disliked the color blue, and quite famously, I think he'd said in interviews. He also decided that he'd had enough of good taste and enough of working with things that he loved. He wanted to try a different way of creating by using the aesthetic of working with things you don't like or don't love. And so he decided to have a blue background. So that's where the blue background has come from, this original sort of idea to work with something that you don't particularly like. And this picture of these 3, I think it's 3, hospital gowns. And that was a picture for a long time that became a sort of picture we wanted to try and work out what it was that he loved about that. But, there was quite an aggressive moment where at one point we had the site, so if you didn't shop quick enough, a big sign would come on your screen and say, buy or die. And that was, you'll wipe out your shopping trolley then if you hadn't bought quickly enough. I'm not quite sure why it had to be so aggressive. Then there was another moment where we found a bit of I think it's called clip art. There was a girl that came from the back of the screen, and she happened to be a kind of sexy girl in a kind of wet T-shirt, and she would clean the back of your screen for you with a wet sponge, which in itself wasn't really what we were trying to get. But what it did do is it showed a feeling of depth behind the screen. A lot of when we look at our screens, it almost sort of feels quite flat. But this provided the idea of depth and a space behind the screen. Then there was quite an interesting sea change. We found a kind of green screen avatar you could buy on the internet. And it was of a girl, a kind of low polygon avatar, so quite rough looking. So he loved the lighting on her, the shading on her is what he liked most. And he actually even gave her a name. He called her Becky. So we started referring to her as Becky. And for a while, Becky was going to wear every piece of YZY clothing, and she was going to be the only person, or thing you saw when you went to the YZY website. You had to find a male counterpoint to Becky. So Matt Williams, who's a friend of Kanye's and a friend of mine, found a video game character which Kanye and I both really liked. So this character and Becky were the face of YZY for this phase of the website. Then I think something changed within him. Didn't want to have this lo-fi aesthetic. And he said to me one day, I want to totally change the aesthetic of the site. I want to lose all black and all white, and I want to have no straight lines, and I want to have nothing in a box. And I want it to be very, very much the color palette of a Monet painting. That fundamentally changed how the site felt. It suddenly felt a lot more beautiful and a lot more poetic and less aggressive. So that was a sort of interesting turnaround. We spent a long time working with that, and I started thinking, what's the experience of doing online shopping like? One could argue it's a little bit impersonal. So we came up with the idea of if we could get a model to wear the clothes for you so you could see somebody wearing the clothes, that might be a nicer thing. So okay, I want to buy that sweatshirt, I want to try it with the red pants, now with the green pants, and now with that bag. And so we come up with a way so that you would ask that of the model, and then he or she would go and put them on for you and come back on screen dressed how you'd ask them to. So it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. But who are these people that would ask them to dress? Are they just generic models in their kind of early 20s, late teens? But who are they? And also, we're all different shapes and sizes. So why don't we have a broad range of people you can choose? Then we thought, well, actually, wouldn't it be nice to know something about these people? And Kanye got very much into the idea of having people who he felt were doing something for the community, something for the society and the community within which they live. So people like a firefighter, a nurse, a school teacher. So, all people who in some way are sort of building the community. And then maybe also it's somebody who's been to prison and has, perhaps, changed as a person. There's something interesting in the idea of having clothes that have personality because of who's been wearing them. The other thing to say is that Kanye doesn't see his clothes. I hope I'm right in saying this. I'm always very cautious about trying to interpret or put words in Kanye's mouth because he's very good at doing that himself. But to try and explain it, Kanye, I don't think, sees the YZY clothes as fashion, i.e. they're not transient and they're not elitist. They're something which he sees as a basic, as a supply, as something in a way that you might say like, bread or water or milk are supplies. And I think in his vision, extrapolating his vision further out, he would be very into the idea of perhaps selling furniture or clothes or houses or travel. So it's an approach. He's very humanistic. The aesthetics of the site, we talked about how Kanye wanted it to be blue. We looked at different sorts of blue. Blue is the colour of the sky. Blue is the colour of the sea. So we looked at different sorts of blue. And he is very, he wants the site to feel beautiful in its simplicity. So he asked me to create a site that had no words on it. Because, of course, we are not all English speaking, or we're not all based in America or Europe. There are different languages. And there also that you want a site that your grandmother could use, or somebody who's not used to internet shopping. So we had to make it very simplistic, almost sort of childlike, in the sort of beauty of what childlike means. The design aesthetic that Kanye wanted to endorse, wanted me to work on at Show Studio, was the idea of no black and white, no sharp edges, nothing in a box, no straight lines, nothing close to the edge of the screen, everything as big as possible. So it has a very simplistic, sort of beautifully kind of joyous simplicity to it. Working for somebody who really knows what they want is incredibly refreshing because he knows exactly what he wants. In a way, like Alexander McQueen, I used to work with a lot, and he knew exactly what he wanted as well. So the experience of going to the site is hopefully very beautiful, very simple, very playful. You have two main options. You either go and you buy the clothes in a very straightforward way, or you can see them being worn by models, as we talked about. There's a third option, which only happens when they drop a new shoe. And of course, those are events which are incredibly popular, and the site becomes there's a massive spike in people going to try and get hold of a new shoe. And we've called that a super bloom. The reason it's called super bloom is from that moment, the awful moment when you remember the fires on the sort of, the hills of California. In fact, very near where Kanye lived, over near Calabasas. However, when the fire died down, the next spring, the incredible super bloom happens where so many flowers came out. The whole of those California hills go from being completely burnt out and charred looking to like a sort of Garden of Eden, a real sort of incredibly beautiful site. So that's why it's called super bloom. So it's a series of images, and so you navigate your way through the site by seeing images. So it's very spontaneous and hopefully has a sort of beautiful simplicity to it. There's been over 10,000 hours of work and at least twice that many images considered and made to give what I believe is a beautifully simple website.